Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lavigne Show. Oh, I just realized I have to update my X because I am not Jason Levine, AB. But thank you very much for joining us today. We have a really, really interesting conversation to have with our two guests, Lawrence, but goes by Larry, Lawrence Solomon and Bruce Pardy. Both gentlemen will be having a great conversation on sovereignty, relationships, and our main topic of conversation is going to be the invitation from President Trump for Canada to become the 51st state. So as I mentioned, we have Bruce Pardy, who is our Ontario-born law professor turned Alberta independence cheerleader, and he is a leading voice when it comes to constitutional law and a viewer favorite. I just chatted with him and said, like, he's been on about 4 or 5 times in the last few months, and it's never dull, it's never boring. Such a wealth of information comes from Bruce, and we're always pleased and honored that he spares some time and comes on the show for us. When it comes to Lawrence, he's a Canadian author on the environment and the executive director for Energy Probe. He's also has a column through the National Post. But the main topic of conversation is going to be, if Trump wants Canada, this is how he gets it. And this is from a recent article that Lawrence wrote. So, gentlemen, I'm going to be bringing you on. Bruce, thank you very much for joining. And again, Larry, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for having us.
Oh, happy to. So, Larry, what prompted you to write this article? Please share.
Well, I want what's best for Canadians, and Canadians would be best off with a U.S.-style administration.
Why? In your opinion?
Well, I actually like the way Stephen Harper put it. Not the Stephen Harper of today, but the Stephen Harper of pre-Prime Minister days. He said it didn't really matter if there was one nation in Canada or 10, or what was important and what was best for Canadians was that they have the right kind of government. And he was also a big fan of the U.S. congressional style of government. In fact, he said that the worst U.S. cabinets were better than the best Canadian cabinets. So we would just be better off. I think the last decade especially has shown where Canadian governments has taken us. So if we were a U.S. state, we would now be the 50th or 49th poorest U.S. state. We're one of the poorest countries now in the OECD. Our system of governance is just not up to scratch. Mm-hmm. This is not serving Canadians well. Canadians would be served much better if we were part of the United States. And another interesting aspect to this is that in many ways, Trump and Harper and even Pierre Elliott Trudeau were on the same page as regards nationhood. Trudeau, for example, Trudeau the Elder, felt that sovereignty was a mistake. That what was important was for nations to be viable, and the sovereignty aspect wouldn't be important. So for that reason, he was very happy to have Quebec as part of the nation of Canada. Using the same logic, Quebec should be happy being part of the nation of the United States. You know, as Trump said, he would he'd love to have the Canadian nation. He'd love the Canadian culture to be part of the American culture. He thinks we have a beautiful flag, beautiful national anthem, which we would keep. So Canadians, the Canadian nation could live very happily in the country of the United States. Harper said more or less the same thing. So Harper, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Trump, they're really all on the same page as regards the importance of sovereignty as opposed to nationhood.
And then, Bruce, I saw you doing a lot of nodding in agreement with the things that Larry was saying. Now, would we still be as poor if we weren't joining the 51st state as collectively as Canada and, let's say, just Alberta? Do you think that would be the case? Like, would we still be classed as the poorest of the states, or is Alberta, can it bring its own?
Sorry,
Bruce.
are you asking me?
No, that was to Bruce.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it would certainly. So Alberta would do probably the best of all the Canadian provinces, but Alberta is still down the list. I mean, if you compare the per capita wealth of Alberta compared to most of the states, it's still not on the top of the heap. So I think in time it would, but it's being held back by its membership in the Canadian Federation. So you'd have to make the change and then give it some time and see what would happen. I have faith that it wouldn't be on the bottom for very long, but at the moment there's no comparison. Our productivity in this country, in all parts of the country, compared to the Americans, has been dismal, absolutely dismal, and that's for so many different reasons. Larry quite rightly referred to our system of government, which I think is the first problem. But for some reason, we have lost our oomph in so many other ways as well, and we've just been coasting. This country's been coasting for a long time, and partly on the coattails of the Americans, which is one thing that Trump has pointed out. Again, quite rightly, for some reason, we seem to think that we have an inherent right to access their market. Their market, their domestic market, is the most lucrative domestic market in the world, and everybody wants access to it. We happen to live next door, and we think we have a right to it. And Trump has finally called us out on that. He has basically pointed out that we expect access to their markets, but we have all kinds of restrictions on them coming into our markets. Now, I don't want to overstate that, because the Americans have a lot of programs and subsidies and restrictions as well. So it's not a black and white thing, but we are the smaller player, and they have the valuable thing, and we have been getting away with probably a better deal than we're probably entitled to, and so we have a new world now with respect to our dealings with the Americans, and a lot of Canadians seem to be upset by that because they've been called out. So there's an old saying that goes, when you are used to special treatment, equal treatment seems like discrimination. And that's kind of the way a lot of Canadians are reacting. That now the States is picking on us because they're insisting upon equal treatment from both sides of the border. So we have our socks to pull up. But I agree with Larry that we would be much better off if we were part of the U.S. But he and I agree, I think, that in spite of Trump's rhetoric about the 51st state, Canada becoming the 51st state, that is not going to happen as a unit. Canada as a unit is not going to become the 51st state, which leads us to the Alberta question and to the question of, how could this be done otherwise, which leads me to the topic of Larry's piece, which is, how could this be done?
And the two, which was surprising to me, there were two leaders within Canada, Larry, that you had highlighted could make this change: Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador. So why a fairly modest province from way out east? Why would they be included as well?
Well, in part, it's the U.S. precedent. When Hawaii and Alaska joined, there was a lot of controversy, a lot of opposition initially to Alaska joining. The Eisenhower solved the problem by bringing in a state that would be seen as a red state, along with a state that would be seen as a blue state, and that wouldn't affect the balance of power in the Senate. The same kind of opposition would arise to the idea of Alberta joining the U.S. on its own. A lot of conservatives in the U.S. would be happy with that, but a lot of Democrats might not be. They would be elated if a province that was seen as left of center, such as Newfoundland, was paired with Alberta. That wouldn't change the balance of power in the Senate. It would make it it would smooth things for the entry of those two provinces. Newfoundland, I think, would be especially interesting to the States because it's such a large, geographically large province, and it also is very close to Greenland, which, as we know, is close to Trump's heart. So those two, I think, would make a good pair. Also, I think Newfoundland would be very interested in joining the United States. It almost joined the United States in the past. It has had a history of good trading relations with the United States. Canada has done a good job of tanking the Newfoundland fishery. There's a lot of resentment in Newfoundland for the destruction of its resources by the Canadian federal government. So all told, I think Newfoundland would be primed to joining the U.S. if a generous offer was made by Trump. And I think the same is the case with Alberta. If those offers were made, I think it would lead to a cascade, a domino effect. As soon as the wealth of Alberta was seen to be leaving Canada, Quebec, I think, would almost certainly decide to leave Confederation as well. The only reason it's in Confederation is because of the subsidies. And in fact, Pierre Elliott Trudeau said as much. He said that the reason that Canada will stay united is because Canadians are willing to be taxed to keep the country together. He was really referring to Alberta specifically, that because Albertans are prepared to be taxed for the privilege of keeping Quebec in the country will stay united. Well, as soon as Albertans say we're not prepared to continue to be taxed, and in fact, Danielle Smith more or less laid out a list of demands for Carney, which I think he would be unlikely to meet if he does remain as prime minister. Well, suddenly we're going to have that constitutional crisis, and Albertans may well decide their lot in life is not to continue to support Quebecers.
Yes, yes, they had the meeting the other day, and she gave the list of demands. Now, let's say if, for example, Alberta, Newfoundland, and Labrador decided to, yes, we want to start considering this. Do you think it would encourage the Canadian government to try to retain us, try to encourage, okay, well, if they plan to leave, let's look at other resources in our other provinces, or just ignore? Like, what do you think the response would be from the government? Either of you.
Go ahead, Larry.
Well, I imagine the Canadian government would be chastened to some extent. I imagine there would also be a lot of resentment. They would probably feel blackmail. I don't know how that would work out, but I suspect that even if a generous offer was made to Alberta, what assurances would there be that offer would be maintained once a new administration came in the United States? So there's been a lot of bad blood between the federal government and Alberta. Alberta has been treated very badly for a great many decades. I would think that once that train starts to leave the station, it's not going to back up.
Right. I tend to agree. And I don't imagine, of course, nobody knows exactly, but my guess would be that the federal government will not behave towards a movement in Alberta the same way as it behaved towards the separation movement in Quebec.
Why? Out of curiosity.
Well, because it has to do with the way political power is distributed in this country. Quebec has political power. Alberta has resources. and those
Mhm.
resources are necessary to feed the power structure in this country. And so the federal government is not really in a position to fundamentally change the way those resources are distributed, because then you lose favor with Quebec. One of the themes of Canadian Federation forever has been to try and keep Quebec in, but it's not
Why
been to
do
try. Yeah, go ahead.
so Bruce, why do you think Quebec is the favored child over Alberta, considering the resources that Alberta provides our nation?
Well, I think because it has both a stronger history and a bigger population than Alberta, and the way the power structure is organized in this country, Quebec has and will continue to have more political weight than Alberta
Mhm.
does. I mean, all
Well,
you need to do for
I was just gonna say, just as
yeah,
we've seen the Carney, his current cabinet,
yeah.
no one west of Manitoba is
That's right,
in the cabinet.
because he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to. The problem, you know, I'm sure people in Alberta and BC know much better than I do what it's like to watch TV on election night to find out that the election's been called even before the votes have been counted, west of Manitoba. But that's the way it's set up. It's one of the characteristics of our first past the post system, but it's even deeper than that, in the sense that even our Senate, which of course is appointed and not elected, the seats in the Senate are distributed so that the four Western provinces combined have the same number of seats as Ontario alone and Quebec alone. And there's no prospect that anybody in the federal realm of things has any interest in changing that. So I would not expect a movement that got really underway in Alberta would be favorably received by federal powers in Ottawa. I expect that it would be a much more aggressive, derogatory response than was received with respect to the separation movement in Quebec.
Larry, would you like to add to that?
Well, the problem though that Ontario and Quebec would have is how to support Quebec without Alberta. And
Exactly
I think
so. Yes.
yeah. And once that becomes clear, I think Quebecers will start to feel that their place is not in Canada. And I think the choice for Quebecers at that point will be to weigh whether they should be a part of the United States or to be independent. I think that'd be a very strong sentiment toward independence. In one of the referenda, Quebec came within 1% of the 50% that they felt they would have needed to leave Canada. So I don't think English Canada could support French Canada without Alberta. I think
agree.
that's the bottom line.
I agree.
So then my
Yeah.
question is, why, if that is the case, why doesn't Alberta and Quebec have a better relationship together then?
Because so far Quebec hasn't needed to. Because
They've
of the
been
way
allowed to be the spoiled child.
they're allowed to be the spoiled child. They've long been entertained in that way by the federal powers that be in this country, and it is possible. You can see today that Alberta is still being taxed and the money's still being redistributed. There's no reason to stop unless things get serious. And so I guess my point is, if the objective of Albertans in this project is to be wooed by the federal government, my inclination, we don't waste your time. That's not really going to happen. Even if it appears to happen, that's not really going to happen. The fundamental relationship with the rest of Canada, and especially with the federal government in Quebec, cannot fundamentally change because they can't afford it to. And so
What? Then why don't they
really,
acknowledge they can't afford to? Like, this is what I just literally can't get my head around, is the treatment of Alberta,
yes,
considering what they offer the whole country.
Yep.
Why is it seen that way? And like you said, Quebec, for example, has been allowed to behave this way. But
Yeah.
what about the rest of the country?
Well, so I mean, I suspect that there is an underlying sentiment that is not always expressed, that Alberta's resources are actually Canada's resources, and that they're even though we have a constitutional division of powers that says that natural resources are provincial jurisdiction, there nevertheless is a sentiment that thinks, well, that's all very well, but it's inside Canada, and therefore it belongs to Canada, and therefore it is justified to take the wealth from those resources and spread it across the country.
What do you think of that there, Larry? That it's not Alberta's oil, it's Canada's oil, and we're just on top of the land.
Well, and the federal government's behavior shows that they feel they can control Alberta's resources. They feel they can control exports. They feel they can control trade via pipelines across the country. Alberta is really not the master of its own resources. The federal government steps in whenever it feels it needs to, and one way that it may well step in, especially if Carney gets in, is by saying a lot of those resources are going to stay in the ground.
Right. Yep. For sure. And you can see that the way pipelines are managed in this country. I mean, Quebec especially. Just recently, the Premier of Quebec said again, one more time, there will be no pipelines for Alberta oil through Quebec. Even though Quebec relies upon Alberta wealth to fund itself, Quebec will not allow any pipelines because it's against their politics. And they can afford to take these hypocritical positions because of the way the power works.
So then, gentlemen, if we are not to capitalize on our natural resources in Alberta, or let's say within Canada as a whole, where does previous governments and current government assume we're going to build our economy?
Well, it may just be an assumption of plundering Alberta's economy for as long as it's plunderable. But I wonder, if perhaps a question for you, why haven't Albertans been more assertive in presenting their case? And why is there so much reluctance among Albertans to either declare independence or to express a desire to join the United States?
Well, for me personally, so one of the first things I got to vote on when we moved to Alberta in 2021 was equalization. And I believe the number was 61% voted to end it. It's our ministers that clearly did nothing with that information. And from what we have seen over the rolling out of the years with medical issues and whatnot, no, there is definitely a growing movement for Canada, well, for Alberta to separate. I'm not personally a fan of joining the US. I would like to see what we can do to strengthen Alberta as a whole. And Jason uses the analogy of marriage counseling. So let's not go straight to the divorce, and certainly don't go straight to another relationship. But let's see what we can do to enhance and improve the current relationship Alberta has with the rest of Canada. And then, like, if there's no hope, okay, counseling's done, let's see about a divorce. But again, let's not rush into another relationship, because I think there would be issues right there.
So you'd like the bad marriage to continue?
No, I'd like to work on the bad marriage to see if it can be improved, because it is a commitment at the end of the day, and you don't want to just turn your back and walk away. But I'm certainly not for not doing anything. That would be staying in a bad marriage. If you go to the counseling and try and improve it, you're trying to take steps. And then, yes, if nothing can be improved, nothing is resolved, then you take the step after that. So I would say there seems to be more vocalization within Alberta to say, no, we need to do something. Something needs to change. Danielle Smith seems to be willing to assist us in that. And it's just a case of we need to get our ducks in a row. We need to be more assertive. I think that's the direction Alberta as a whole wants to go. We certainly do not want the current status quo. No, we don't want to stay in the bad marriage, but we do want to fight for it.
Now, you have a pretty good suitor right now in Donald Trump. And if you go through marriage counseling for another 3 years, you may not have such a good suitor.
True, but I think JD Vance is in the running for them to have him for another 80s. I mean, I believe that is the plan, and I believe if he continues, I don't want to use the term rhetoric, but if he continues with the Trump messaging, and if they're able to see that come to fruition over the next 4 years with Trump, they would be willing to see it continue with JD Vance. With that, I would say after 4 years of counseling, then we would be more knowledgeable on whether or not, do we want to pull the plug on this marriage, or do we want to look elsewhere? So I would say now would be it would be rushed.
I'm not sure that I understand the counseling thing. It seems to me from outside that Alberta has been asking for counseling for ages. I mean, I remember back when Stephen Harper was talking about the West wanting in, and lots of proposals have seen the light of day, like for a Triple E Senate, for example, all of which have been utterly ignored by central Canadian powers. Utterly ignored. Nothing was ever taken seriously. And so I don't understand why people of Alberta would think at this particular time those kinds of acts would get any more serious consideration than they did before. I mean, I would, if I were Albertan, I would suspect that any kind of engagement that you got would be for the purpose of delay until the orange man is gone, so that it's not the invitation's no longer on the table.
I think there's a little bit of hope in Danielle Smith that she's going to be willing to fight within for the counseling, if we're going to keep using that analogy. I think people have a lot of faith in Danielle Smith that she's going to be the premier to make change.
I don't want to push the analogy too far, but let me try this. Alberta, given what I've seen, starting to sound like a battered spouse. You know?
I hear you. I hear you. I get that completely. I don't know. I think, and it may be just the case. This could be delay today. We'll try one more. We'll try one more. And it is, I guess, a bit. Everyone's a bit apprehensive. Yes, to yank off that Band-Aid, and yes, let's be courted by, our neighbors to the south. What do you think that, Larry?
You're making Alberta seem like a managerial state, not one that's geared to decisive action, not one that's entrepreneurial. The idea that Vance is going to have the same policies as Vance, I like Vance, but I view him as a politician, and he's going to be more interested in staying in power or gaining power than in any vision that might harm political chances. Trump, I think, is quite a unique character in that regard. So this is an opportunity for Alberta. It may not come again, and after another 3 years of being battered, the prospects, I think, will weaken. In addition, if it is Carney who comes in, he will be much less receptive to the notion of Alberta developing its resources than has been the case in the past, like much less. So the idea of dragging your feet now when you have this golden opportunity is just perplexing to me.
Well, let me ask you this. If you believe that now's the opportunity with Trump, you had said that you think that Vance is more of a politician. So what would happen to Alberta, whichever province decides to join the US, once Trump is out of office? What do you think the relationship attitudes would be with the new administration, with the Canadians?
You mean before or after Alberta becomes the state?
Let's say after Alberta. Let's say we take this opportunity, we jump on board. Trump's our guy, but now Trump is out of the administration and it's JD Vance, this politician. How would that change, you think?
Well, but then it doesn't matter, because you might as well ask, what JD Vance's attitude towards Wyoming is. I mean, who cares? You're a state. You're a part of the union. All the constitutional rules apply to you as a state. You're inside the the belly of the beast, nothing else needs to be said. Now there'll be transition, of course, but all the constitutional structures and so on that apply to states apply to you because you're a state. So the attitudes of the federal government don't really matter, except to the extent that they matter to all the states.
I just want to share this comment here that's popped up, and they're very correct. Paul, you said you moved to Alberta in only 2021. Those who have been in Alberta for longer have a different idea. We want secession. And I completely agree. I have no doubt I'm only going on my own experience here, which is why I'm willing to, okay, let's wait and see, see what happens. But I know there are many people who are born and raised here, generations in Alberta, that
Right.
are like, no, we're done. We're done.
Right.
We want out
Right.
now.
Yeah, and I don't blame them one bit for that. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's still a minority view. And
Well,
what I-
yes, it will be a minority view, but I don't. Well, Paula might know better than I what the possible numbers are. What's the proportion of the population who might feel that way?
I don't know. Jason would be the better person, but I know the numbers are rising. I don't want to quote something that I think I heard or had read, but no, the numbers are rising because a comment was made when Danielle Smith had commented, I think a couple of weeks ago, saying that, oh, she's not aware of people wanting to separate. And the feedback that at least I was seeing on X, like, what is she talking about? Like, no, we are here. We are like, hello. We want changes to be made. So Bruce, with your thoughts, which do you think would be better for, and two parts here, Alberta and then Canada, if we were to simply become independent or to join the US? What do you think the differences would be?
Well, I'm a little bit torn. I do agree with Larry that there's an opportunity right now. A window is open, and it may close, and so I would think seriously about that. But here, for my money, are the dangers and opportunities. If Alberta simply became independent and did not join the U.S., there is some danger, some risk that it might be inclined to, instead of basically starting from scratch, might be inclined to reproduce what it's used to. That is, become independent, but we are familiar with a form of government. We have a Westminster system. Let's have it again. Let's just get rid of the Canadian federal system, but we'll be a Westminster system of government inside Alberta. We'll still have a first past the post system. We'll have the same kind of constitution that Canada had. Let's stick with what we know. We'll get rid of equalization. We'll have our own pension plan, and everything will be hunky dory. And my response to that is, no, you're missing the point. The point is that the Canadian system of government now has been shown not to work very well. And the reason for becoming independent is to start again. If you could, and this is one of the upsides, the potential as an independent country is that you could try to improve upon the American Constitution. Now, that would be an accomplishment, because the American Constitution is not perfect. I mean, it does have some flaws. It could be improved. But if the question is between, something old or joining the U.S., you're much further ahead to join the U.S., much further ahead, because it is the gold standard of constitutional architecture. It's not perfect. It needs to be improved, but it's the best thing going right now. So unless Alberta is determined to improve upon the American system, you're much better off as a state.
And just to answer your question, so it was Rachel Parker. This is what I couldn't remember. A recent poll by Rachel Parker showing 40% for independence, 20% for statehood, giving 60% for change of some kind.
Right. That's good. That's very good.
Yes. Larry, did you want to add to what Bruce had said?
Well, I would ask you, name 3 problems that you see if Alberta joins the United States. Like, what are you afraid of? What are people afraid of?
So for me, it's a personal issue. I'm an immigrant. I emigrated to Canada. I feel so it's to me, it's my nationality, it's my citizenship. So to me, I'm not ready to become an American. I'm a proud Canadian. And then one of our chatters had made a comment here. So here, Alberta could not necessarily be a state, but perhaps become a territory like Puerto Rico or the US Virgin Islands. So it depends on if we're keeping us our nationality, our citizenship of being Canadian. To me, that's important as an immigrant. When it comes to economy, resources, industry, um, I do think the US could strengthen us, but I quite honestly, I think that's the ability as well that Alberta could have by itself, separate from Canada, or at least even within Canada. We have the ability to progress our energy development, our industry as well. And I'd love to see Alberta given the opportunity to do that.
So you see a theoretical advantage, potential advantage to Alberta being independent, but I haven't heard any reasons to fear Alberta being a US state. Is there any drawback that you see in Alberta being a US state?
Not off the top of my head, personally. I can't. No.
So there's an interesting tension in Alberta between loyalty to Canada and the desire to be independent, and that's understandable.
Mhm.
You're part of a country, and you've thought of yourself as a citizen of that country. But my question for Albertans is, at this moment in time, what is it that they believe that they would be loyal to or defending? I mean, what is it? What is the Canada that you think you belong to? Because the
Mhm.
experience of an awful lot of people very recently, especially during COVID, was that the country that they thought they lived in does not actually exist. It was a thing they carried around in their heads. And I would have thought that the way Alberta has been treated over time would have demonstrated to Albertans that whatever it was that they thought Canada was, it actually isn't that at all.
Mhm. And then
And so it's
yeah,
sort of like
comment here.
it's sort of like clinging to an old relationship, because the person that you're breaking up with was one thing inside your head, and then turns out to be something else altogether, and you still can't let go the image you have in your head.
Mhm. No, that's true. And Fran's written here, waiting patiently. Our Canada is gone. Alberta needs to move ahead and not go back.
Right. Right.
Yes, I at the end of the day, I don't disagree with those principles. And yes, just like previously when Queen Elizabeth was alive, I was very much pro monarchy.
Right.
She has passed, Charles is in place, and now I'm realizing it was merely nostalgia.
Right.
I grew up with her. I was brought up in England where I learnt a lot of British and, English history. So there was a lot of nostalgia and sentimental attachment to it. Now that she's passed and King Charles is in place, I'm realizing, no, no, thank you. I do not want the monarchy in Canada. I would definitely be a proponent for that separation. And I think if Canada, Alberta need to make some strong changes for the betterment of the nation and its people, then yes, I think that is something we should stand up to try to achieve.
Right. Right.
Larry I know I said I don't have any issues with the US, but you tell me, what could be some of the cons, whether Alberta or Canada were to join the US?
Oh, I don't see any cons. The Canada of my childhood, I am attached to that Canada, but I'm not attached to what Canada has become. And Canada, very consciously, as a result of both Trudeaus, stopped being a national state.
Yep.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau considered nationalism to be retrograde. That was his term. He thought it was well established. 150 years of evidence, he felt, showed that nationhood was retrograde. And his response was to create a multinational state, which he thought was the way of the future. So he started funding different national enclaves, and those enclaves just sprouted. And his purpose was to destroy the notion of the founding cultures. So the culture that you're attached to, that you have this affinity for, that's gone.
Yes.
But I think it does exist in latent form. Before Confederation, there was a spirit. Canada existed, and before Canada was split up into Upper and Lower Canada. Canada was entrepreneurial. It was freedom loving. It made a decision to join, not to join the United States at the time. That in hindsight, that appears to have been a mistake. But the notion, the people of Upper Canada are still there, and there's still a latent desire for freedom. That desire for freedom, which was squelched by the Trudeaus, I think it would be brought back if it was sheltered under the principles that govern the United States. So there could be a resurrection of those old values that you seem to value. I value them. I think Bruce values them. We would be freer in the United States than we are now in Canada.
I actually don't doubt, like, if you looked at what our rights are today and compared, I don't disagree with that, quite frankly. Larry, if you can just touch upon it, within your article, you gave us a very speedy timeline to when this could be achieved. Could you just explain that to our viewers?
Well, I think we need a speedy timeline, because Trump is only here for another 3.5 years or so. If things aren't put in motion quickly, they're not going to happen. I'm just not at all confident that anyone else is going to care to the extent that Trump cares about bringing Canada into the United States. I mean, Manifest Destiny has been a long view. It goes back to John Quincy Adams, but it hasn't been potent in 100 years. It really hasn't been a potent force in the United States. Trump has brought that back. I don't know if his successor will carry through with that. So if he doesn't move quickly, and if Alberta doesn't move quickly, I don't think anything's going to happen.
And that leads me to this question here from Donna, and who is going to lead the charge in separation?
Good question, Donna. Great question.
Who's our go-to guy or gal?
Donna, it's going to have to be you.
You heard, Donna. You heard. It's up to you. But seriously, who do we want? A provincial leader to step up? Do we want some guy with a flag? Like, who is going to lead the charge and get this done?
You don't want somebody whose fortunes depend upon the existing order of things. You don't want a vested interest to pretend that they want to throw away everything that there is. You need somebody probably who's fresh on the scene, who's determined to do this for its own sake. You need somebody at the front of the parade, leading the parade, so that the people who are in power run to the front of the parade to lead it to where it's already going. That's the kind of political impetus that's required. I don't think it's going to happen on its own. I don't think certainly that the people who are already installed inside the power structure in Alberta, not to mention the rest of Canada, are going to take the initiative on this, because they're very well looked after the way they are. It's the people who are unhappy who need to lead this. And if the others come on board, then so be it. Great. But that's not where it's going to start.
So what do either of you think of Jeffrey Rath? Jeff Rath, who's going to be leading a group down to the US. I think they're doing a press conference on Wednesday, but the goal is to go down and speak to the Trump administration. What do you think of, is this our go-getter?
I've only spoken to Jeff once. I enjoyed the conversation very much. He seems determined and has initiatives, all of which I applaud. I really don't know the details of that plan. To me, he seemed to be like so there are two things going on, and I can't quite reconcile them. Number one is this discussion with certain Americans, and the other one is a concern for what I would call fleeting concerns. I don't mean to downgrade them, not by any means. They're very serious. But so let me just list them: equalization, pension plan, resource interference, and so on. Those are all irritants and symptoms of a big problem. But for my money, if you managed to start to resolve those symptoms, you would still have the problem. And so
Mhm.
I am suspicious of any plan that says, all right, let's focus on equalization and let's focus on the pension plan. That's for me, that's entirely missing the plot.
Right, right. We have a greater issue. There's a root to it.
Yes.
Correct. Do you agree with that, Larry?
Well, I think that no one has really come forward in Alberta, and that's why it's up to Trump. If he wants Canada, he needs to make an offer. If he makes an offer, then I think Albertans will swoon. If he makes an attractive offer, suddenly all the insecurities that Albertans feel, and I think they feel insecurities about independence as well, because if you're an independent Alberta, well, you're landlocked, and people see that as a problem. And what if Canada and the United States conspire to block exports? Or you can imagine all kinds of conspiracies. And I think Albertans have all kinds of fears. I think they're unfounded, because if Alberta was to declare independence, I think it would actually hold all the cards in regards to its relationship with Canada. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot of fear in Alberta. I view Albertans as being really quite timid in this, and that's why a bold offer from Trump, I think, would see that those fears evaporate, and Albertans would show some spine, and then they would decide to whether they really want independence, whether they really want a degree of freedom or not.
Yes, in
And
your article, you'd mentioned that this could be done piecemeal. So do you think the offer would be for particular provinces and not as the country as a whole?
I think it has to be done piecemeal for the reason that Bruce said, that swallowing Canada as a whole, which Trump wants, and he may be an adherent of Sun Tzu, the military strategist from China, who said that you should take over your enemies whole and intact. So that is what Trump wants. He wants to take over Canada whole and intact. But the way to do that, I think, has to be by demonstrating to Canada, to the other provinces, what their fate is if they lose Alberta. I think as soon as it appears that Alberta is committed to leaving Canada, the rest of Canada will it'll be a cold shower. They'll suddenly realize that they're not viable. The rump of Canada will decide that they can't survive except at a low level of prosperity. And at that point, they'll start making all kinds of decisions. And predominantly, they will decide that it's in their interest to join the United States. And at that point, Trump may get his wish of having swallowed Canada whole.
yes, right. But can I make a comment about the choices that Alberta has before it? The two choices that we've talked about are both viable choices. Those two choices are become a state or become independent. Either of one of those two choices is a good choice. But there's other choices that are a very bad idea, in my opinion.
Oh,
so for example, do not do something that's halfway. Like, don't become a territory. Don't become, economically integrated with the US and still try to be a province of Canada. Like, like either be an independent country or be a state. Like choose one, folks. Don't try to keep what you've got, but also try to get something new, because then you'll be in no man's land. You won't be a country. If you're not a country, then you don't get to make your own rules about your own territory. If you're a state, then you're a state, and you have everything that all the other states have. That's safe. An independent country is status. Anything in between is not a thing, and you will put yourself in a worse position than you're in right now.
I was actually surprised to hear you mention the possibility of Alberta becoming a territory. Is that part of the discussion?
Well, people have suggested it. I have not. I don't think that's viable. I don't think there's any reason to go that way, but people have said, oh, well, before you can become a state, you have to become a territory like Puerto Rico. I do not think that's true.
And what's the logic in people who espouse that?
I think they're scared of not being able to negotiate statehood, and I don't think that fear is well-founded.
Well, and we just put here independence all the way. So there are some, because I'm looking at our chat, there are some who are saying that they definitely want to, some Albertans definitely want to be away from Canada. And there's also some saying, yeah, just let's become that 51st state. So here's a theoretical question here. So if, like you'd said, that if the US makes Alberta this piecemeal offer, and then it's too good to turn down, and then the rest of the country is now realizing, oh, we're about to lose Alberta.
Right.
Do you think there could be a case of, well, if they did now go to the US and says, okay, we want to join, do you think that could weaken their piecemeal offer? Because some provinces are weaker than others. And so if they're not as attractive, do you think they may get a rough deal when it comes to them being, trying to be enticed by the US, and they'll be like, well, you don't really have much when it comes to resources, but we'll take you anyway, but this is we're going to offer, and it may not be as attractive as something that Alberta and our other resource-rich provinces may be offered.
Well, I suspect that the result would be Canada coming in as a whole, possibly without Quebec. But once Alberta expresses its interest in leaving, the rest of the country will just fall in line.
That's quite possible. It's quite possible if it carries on in a piecemeal way, and if other provinces that follow don't get the same kind of offer that Alberta gets. I mean, that's just an incentive for Alberta to be the first mover. Like, don't worry about that. Look, there are all kinds of uncertainties here. No one knows exactly what's going to happen or what the terms are going to be. And the inclination to want to know exactly how it's going to go to feel safe is something that we have to get over. Like, this is unknown territory, people. And we're doing it because things are not right the way they are. And so you have to give up security for the enterprise of going on an adventure, because the adventure might turn out really, really well.
But I don't think that that it's in the cards that there would be 58 states or so. If
that could well be, and the population of some of those states would be very small. I mean, certainly, like let's just take the most obvious example. PEI is not going to be a state. It's just not going to happen, right? And so then we start to play with the borders. Like, okay, so what could be a viable state? And there's all kinds of possibilities.
Very true.
The main problem I see is that the U.S. would not want most provinces as states. That would affect the balance of power between Democrats and Republicans. I think it would not fly. But what I could see in a piecemeal scenario, what I could see is, for example, the maritime provinces joining Maine. That way, there wouldn't be any additional senators. There would be additional members of the House, which would create a problem, but a lesser problem than senators. But I can see there being 52 states if only Alberta and Newfoundland join. But I think more likely there'll be 51 states because most of Canada or all of Canada will join.
Interesting.
That could be the best case scenario, frankly.
How would you think that would manage within the new 51st state? Like we're divided up and have stayed divided up for a reason. How do you think it would work if we just became one?
Well, so Canada's always been a very unlikely country geographically, right? Because our population is spread from east to west in a ribbon, within striking distance of the U.S. border. We've always been a country dependent upon the U.S. We go north-south, not east-west primarily in our trade, in our transportation, and so on. So the idea of Canada being a 51st state is a little bit contrary to the realities of what Canada is. I agree with Larry about what the political possibilities are, but I'm not all that wed to the idea that Canada should be the 51st state as a unit. The political ordering doesn't really make any more sense to me as a state than it does as a country. But you could see that if Alberta took the first steps, you could see other things happening. Like, for example, it would make perfect sense if Saskatchewan said, okay, well, us too, let's be a 51st state together. And then who knows, maybe BC would say, well, count us in too. So a 51st state that consisted of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and maybe BC, or at least part of BC, would make perfect sense. And then you might think, okay, so we'll have a 51st state, and maybe part of the Maritimes could join Maine and not become an additional state, just make that state bigger. Then you got a good chunk of Canada already, and whatever happens from there, have to wait and see.
How do you like that idea there, Larry?
No, I like it. That there's also been a long independence movement on the West Coast. It's called Cascadia.
Yes,
that involves BC, Washington State, and Oregon. And at different times, there's been a fair amount of public support for it. And most, I think, fairly recent surveys in the last 5 or 10 years show that British Columbians identify more with Washington State than with the rest of Canada. I think it was something like the majority of British Columbians identify with Washington State, and only maybe 7 or 9% identify with Ontario.
That's not surprising. Yeah.
So the affinity, the north-south affinity that Bruce referred to, which exists economically, it also exists culturally, and that may be another way that Canada unites with the United States.
Right.
What do you think the Trump administration would like to get their hands on first? Resources, Northwest Passage? Like what do you think is really top of their list that they would why they prompted this?
Right. Great question. And who's to know exactly, but my guess is that near the top of the list is security. Both the actual border between Canada and the US, but also the fact that our country is being infiltrated by foreign powers. And we are their border between them and China and Russia. I don't blame them for being very concerned about what's happening in this country. And so part of Trump's motivation might well be national security, among the other kinds of things that you mentioned. I mean, resources would be great, but I don't think at this particular moment, Trump is first and foremost concerned about oil. I think it's security.
Here's the thing: we should be too.
Oh, of course.
If we were, we wouldn't have this tariff war being held against us, because many conversations I've had with people, and if there's a deeper reason behind it, I'm not aware, but my thoughts are that yes, it's highlighted security, gave you the threat. Why did we go for the threat right away? And why did we not say, you know what? All right, let's get this done. Let's deal with our security. And why not put on the table, you know what? We're going to work our way east, or we're going to work our way west, and we're going to be tightening up our borders along each province and say, you know what, you're right. We should do this. We're going to invest in it now. But instead we've gone, oh no, look how much we're going to go for the tariff war, and now look how much it's going to hurt us economically. Why didn't
Because you're
we go
taking a
for the
lot for
border?
granted. You're taking the integrity of our own leadership system for granted.
Yes, I guess
If
so.
if that was the case, then we might not be in the situation that we're in.
I don't disagree. What about you there, Larry? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think security is the prime issue, and along those lines, the 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 Northwest Territories, I think, are up for grabs, and it may be that there's a wild card that's in the works, because the Inuits in Canada, but also uh, in Russia, and in Greenland, have a formal plan for independence, and at some point they may trigger that, and they may have the support of the United Nations or China. And if they try that, or if that seems imminent, it's very easy to see Trump just coming in and just snatching the Northwest Territories.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
That's the first time I've heard Northwest Territories being mentioned in conversation regarding this.
Yep. Well, I mean, if we were Trump, wouldn't we be nervous about what was not happening up in the Northwest Territories as far as the Canadian government and Canadian security was concerned? I mean, China and Russia have been sniffing around up there for a long time, and what we have, like, Larry, we have 2 decrepit icebreakers in service. Is that
Right.
something like is that in the ballpark? I mean, we don't have security up there. We have the pretense of suggesting that it's ours just because we say that it is.
Yes, that's I mean, just look at the state of our military and resources or things we need right now, today, let alone something that's kind of on the back burner that we don't think about, which is
Yep.
unfortunately that area of the country.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we're gonna go make this segue over to our supporters area. So if you could just hold on a moment while I go ahead and say goodbye to everyone. So hold on, please. So public, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've learned something, taken away, voiced your opinion on whether or not Alberta, Canada should stay, should separate, should join the US. But it's food for thought, and I hope that you've gained some knowledge and to perhaps confirm your opinions or made you think about something else. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to go overhead to the members or supporters area now, but otherwise, public, take care and God bless.